I will kick us off. So, thank you all again for having us here today. We are looking forward to talking to you about the Oceanwide Seafood Program and to answer any questions you might have about the science behind our program and recommendations. Slide, please.
Yeah, well, we're just figuring out my computer. There we go. All right.
Thank you.
No
So,
worries.
my name is Shiori, and I'm the accounts coordinator for the Oceanwide Seafood, and I'm based in Vancouver. So, in my role, I manage partner relationships in Western Canada. And we also have here Rachel here today, who is our in-house fisheries expert. Um, oh, and my favorite seafood item right now is sable fish.
Mm.
I recently discovered how to make like a miso sable fish at home, so I'm really obsessed with that. It's a lot easier than it looks, and it's delicious. Rachel, do you want to pop in with your favorite seafood item
Oh, that's
preparation?
so hard. Um, Sablefish is pretty delicious. I might have to jump on the sablefish bandwagon. I think my
Nice.
favorite way to prepare it, though, is to like broil it or throw it on the grill, but to do the collar, which for those of
Oh,
you that don't know, is like right behind the head before you hit where the fillet is. There's like the shoulder girdle of the fish, which has lots of very, very tender meat because it does all of the control of the fins. It's really delicious. No one eats it in North America really, and therefore you can get it for like 60 cents a pound. Whereas if you were in Japan or somewhere else, it would be a fancy expensive thing. So to do it that
mhm.
way and then like with ponzu sauce, best thing ever.
Oh, yum. I'm getting hungry again. Okay, for today's presentation, I'm going to first talk a little bit about what the Oceanwide Seafood Program is and how the program works. And then Rachel is going to do a deeper dive into how our seafood recommendations work and what our program considers sustainable. And then I'll wrap up by talking about how we work with our program partners and then touch on what you can do to help. So, like Caitlin said, if you have any questions throughout, please just pop them into the chat box and we'll get to them either throughout the presentation or at the end. So, what is the Oceanwide Seafood Program? The Oceanwide Seafood Program is a conservation program that was created to help educate businesses and consumers about seafood sustainability. So it was launched 15 years ago at the Vancouver Aquarium when a local chef voiced his concerns that he wanted to be able to better communicate the sustainability facts about the seafood to his customers. So the program was created at the Vancouver Aquarium, first with only 16 local partner restaurants who decided to swap one of their seafood items out for a more sustainable option and then indicate that item with the Oceanwide Seafood label. And from there, we've now expanded to over 750 partners that use the logo in over 3,000 locations. So you may have seen the Oceanwise symbol or logo at maybe a fresh seafood counter or on product packaging or perhaps on a restaurant menu. But the Oceanwise symbol on a product tells people that it is an ocean-friendly choice that is recommended by our program. So I'll let Rachel go into the science of our recommendations.
Awesome. Thanks, Shiori. So, to get things started, I thought I would first kick off the conversation by defining what ocean-wide seafood characterizes as sustainable. Because the word sustainable can relate to many different things, everything from social justice to economics, as well as to the environment. So, for the purpose of our program, we at Oceanwide Seafood classify sustainable seafood as products that come from fishing or aquaculture, which is also known as fish farming, which ensure the long-term health and abundance of the species that are being targeted for harvest, as well as that reduce the impacts on the surrounding environment, so that we ensure that aquatic ecosystems can continue to support life into the future, and we can ensure that people will have access to seafood into the future. Oceanwise recommended seafood is sustainable because it comes from fisheries and aquaculture that promote healthy and resilient wild populations, the fisheries and aquaculture that limit the impacts that they have on habitats and other species, and because they're managed effectively and adaptively. And we'll talk about all these things in a bit more detail here. So the world of sustainable seafood is super complex, and it really is a global movement today. And there are many organizations globally that are running sustainable seafood programs. Here I've highlighted a selection of different seafood sustainability programs, which are from two organizations called the Global Seafood Ratings Alliance and Conservation Alliance for Seafood Solutions. Both of these groups are working collaboratively to ensure that marine and freshwater resources are available for years to come, and they're doing that by working together to develop globally agreed upon assessment standards for seafood sustainability. Seafood sustainability is really important for a lot of reasons. First, globally, the scope of fisheries and aquaculture and those that depend on those resources is massive. So across the world today, over 3 billion people are relying on seafood as an important source of protein and essential nutrients. And the scope of fisheries and aquaculture production globally is huge. It's over 180 million tons. So in the red and orange here, you can see the amount of fish and seafood that are caught in wild capture fisheries. Those from inland waters are down on the bottom there, and then in marine waters up above. And then in the two shades of blue, you can see how much production is coming from aquaculture. And as you can see there, aquaculture production has increased dramatically over the past 30 years or so. And it's doing so to supply the needs of people and their demand for seafood. The seafood production coming from aquaculture and wild capture fisheries supports food security and also provides direct economic benefit and opportunity to almost 60 million people worldwide, as well as to millions more through employment within the seafood supply chain. So seafood is big business that's critically important to people for a number of reasons. Despite the scope and importance of seafood to the global population, only about 30% of fisheries and aquaculture globally are covered by sustainability assessments. And these assessments come from two main types of organizations, ratings organizations like OceanWise or Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch Program, as well as from different certification bodies, such as the Marine Stewardship Council and Aquaculture Stewardship Council. And today I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the differences between those two groups, but if anyone is curious, happy to break that down when we get towards the Q&A portion of today's talk. So the scope of global seafood is huge. The amount of coverage for sustainability assessments is not, which leaves us in this paradigm of people wanting access to sustainable seafood, but they're not necessarily being the capacity and resources worldwide to meet that demand. And what OceanWise does is to try to bridge that gap by using information from a variety of different sources to inform the recommendations that we make for seafood. So here I'm highlighting 4 of those main sources. All of them use written assessments of seafood sustainability that use a written standard to try to convert like the qualitative idea of sustainability into a quantitative set of numbers that you can use to score a fishery or aquaculture. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in the next few slides. So OceanWise uses information from a bunch of diverse sources. We ourselves will author assessments for both aquaculture and fisheries, usually with a focus on Canadian fisheries. We also utilize reports that are written by the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch Program, as well as we link into different recommendations through eco-certifications. And we're able to do that because Seafood Watch has benchmarked the standard that they and we use for writing a fisheries assessment or an aquaculture assessment to the standards that those programs use to write their assessments. So I myself am a specialist and have expertise in fisheries more so than aquaculture. So to capitalize on the minimal amount of time we have today, I thought it would be best to touch on how OceanWise assesses the sustainability of fisheries. That said, we do have a ton of recommendations for sustainable aquaculture, and I'm more than happy to answer any aquaculture questions that you have when we get to the Q&A. So to do a sustainability assessment for a fishery, we're bringing together data from a variety of sources. The first thing we do is we collect fishery independent data, that is data that is collected outside of fishing activity. like government surveys that are used to estimate like things like population abundance, the mortality rate of fish, or the age structure of a population. And then we combine that data with information that's called fishery dependent data, which is information that's coming directly from a fishery. And that would be things like catch rates or the amount of effort that's being used in order to catch seafood. And the last thing we do is collect fisheries management plans that outline the regulations and the enforcement of regulations within a fishery. And we bring all that information together for use in this big written standard, which is like 110 pages long, that assesses sustainability based on 4 main criteria, which I'm going to talk about here in a bit more detail. So first, criteria 1 looks at impacts of fishing on the stock that is the target of fishing. And what that focuses on is the health of the targeted stock. So is the abundance that is present enough to support the fishing that is happening, as well as things like fishing mortality. So what percentage of the population of fish is being taken by fishing, and is that percentage or proportion a sustainable amount given the size of the stock? Second, we look at the impacts of fishing activity on other species through bycatch, which I'm going to talk about in quite a bit more detail in the coming slides. As well, we look at the effectiveness of fisheries regulations and management. And we do this by looking at a number of things, including the strategy that they're using and how they implement that strategy for management, how they deal with bycatch and how they reduce it, how they collect their data and whether they're using best available scientific advice to inform management. And then finally, really important things surrounding enforcement. So it doesn't matter how good your management is if you can't enforce it. So we look at that. And as well, whether there's the inclusion of stakeholders within the management process, because having buy-in from the people doing the fishing is critically important to making a fishery sustainable. The last criteria we look at is impacts of fishing on habitats or the greater ecosystem. And it's here where we look at things like the impacts of gear on the seafloor, or on the impacts of removing a certain level of the food chain from the ecosystem on other species. So if you take out a forage fish like sardines that are to prey for a number of other things, is that fishing having cascading impacts on other species as well? So to highlight the complexity of these assessments and to get a little bit more into detail about what makes seafood sustainable and to maximize our time, I thought I would focus on a chat about bycatch and what impacts bycatch have on sustainability of a fishery. So what is bycatch? It's the portion of catch that is returned to the water for economic, legal, or other reasons. It includes things you might be familiar with, like the incidental capture of turtles, sharks, marine mammals, or birds, as well as the capture of fish or invertebrates that weren't the target of fishing. And the amount of bycatch that fishing activity incurs is dependent on a number of specifics of that fishery. Broadly speaking, though, the harvest method that's used is one of the largest determining factors. To make things really confusing, as things are across assessments of seafood sustainability, some gear methods can be really highly sustainable in one place and not sustainable in others, which makes assessments really specific to the fishery, or in the case of aquaculture, to the different things, aspects of that aquaculture facility that you're looking at. When we're talking about bycatch, harvest methods are categorized as 2 different types. One is selective, meaning that that gear primarily catches the species and the size of individuals that you're targeting, or unselective, which are methods that capture essentially whatever species or individuals interact with the fishing gear. Some of the most selective harvest methods include harpoon and diving. So on the left here, you can see harpoon, which is common for species like swordfish and tuna. And on the right, you can see diving, both with a spear and through hand harvest on the top there. These methods of diving are often used for catching invertebrates like clams and lobsters. They're also used as fish, but on the fish side, that's usually for direct human consumption and not for sale. These methods are incredibly selective, and they have near zero bycatch, and that's because the harvester is directly interacting with the individual that they're choosing to harvest. So in doing so, they can select a fish or a crab or a lobster that is the right species and the correct size to fish. Fishing using pots, traps, and trap nets are also highly selective because these gears are developed to be specific to the species that you're trying to catch. And the gear size configuration and bait choice also depend on the species. These gears are baited with different food to lure organisms to enter the enclosure, but then make it really difficult for those individuals to escape. They're used to catch bottom-dwelling crustaceans such as crabs and lobsters, as well as some species of fish like eels and our favorite sablefish. While trap nets, which are shown here on the top left, can be used to fish for a number of different species, including salmon. Hook and line fishing can vary from highly selective methods like pole and line, shown on the left, where fish are harvested one by one, and harvesters can remove non-target species from the lines, as well as choose bait specific to the species that they're trying to harvest. While long line fishing, shown here on the right, can be highly unselective. The gear, as you can see, is composed of a long line with a series of shorter lines attached, which then have baited hooks, which are either floated within the water column or sunk down to the seafloor. And though long lining can be made more selective by choice of hook size, the location of fishing, and the length of the long line, the method is often highly unselective and can be one of the poster childs for bycatch, as any other species that are passing by can be caught by the hooks. The harvest method is common for a number of species, including tuna and swordfish, while bottom long lining, so setting those hooks against the seafloor, is really common for species like halibut. So here we'll see if it works. I have a video of pole and line, just because I feel like people don't often think about how this works, and it's really, really, really cool. So you have a number of harvesters. You have a number of harvesters on the back of the boat, all with their own pole, with a line that doesn't even have a reel on it. The hooks that they're using are unbarbed, and because that barb isn't on the hook, they can basically catch the fish, hold the tension, and in one shot fling it over their shoulder and have it release into the boat. This harvest method is quite selective because the hook size, the bait, if there is bait, or lure type is specific to the species you're trying to harvest. And if you catch something you don't want, by reducing the tension that you have on your line, you can give that fish an opportunity to get off. So next up here is purse seine, which again is a really common fishing gear for a number of species of fish, everything from small sardines to large tunas. And this gear is essentially a wall of netting that's set in a ring around a school of fish. The top of the net floats on the surface, while the bottom of the net is pursed in by drawing a rope tight. And what that does is close the bottom of the net so that fish can't escape by swimming down. Purse seines can vary in size from a few meters to over 2 kilometers in length, according to the vessel and the target species. This method is really interesting in that it appears that it would be quite unselective, but it can be a quite selective method of fishing because harvesters will often set the gear on an observed school of fish. Selectivity can also be improved based on the timing and location of harvest. Purse seine has also been a poster child for bycatch because historically, dolphin pods have been used as a natural cue to aid harvesters towards finding abundant schools of fish. This is called setting on tuna. Once the netting has been set, the encircled marine mammals can't escape and can either become entangled, injured, or stressed. And that's why when you see something called dolphin safe tuna, that's implying that this method wasn't used. And it kind of highlights the differences in the selectivity of a single gear just based on the methodology that's used in setting it. Last up here is trawl, which again is one of the poster childs for unsustainable, unselective fishing. Trawl nets vary in length, mesh size, material, and tow speed, as well as how they're towed, either at the surface, shown on the top left, in the water column at some measure of depth, which is called like a mid-water trawl, or along the seafloor, shown on the bottom left in bottom trawling. These methods are unselective. They use cones of netting dragged either through the water column or against the seafloor to trap any organism they encounter that is large enough not to pass through the mesh. Bottom trawling also have the potential to cause substantial damage to habitats if dragged over things like reefs or like rocky shoals, which are critical for critical cover for juvenile and adult fish. They can be used to target a ton of different species like shrimp, crab, flounder, lobster, as well as like sardine. And again, it's one of those poster child for unselectivity, but it can be a sustainable method. Using a bottom trawl on a complex habitat like a reef is going to have significant negative impacts. But at the same time, trawling on the bottom of a sandy habitat that doesn't have a lot of different complexity to it can end up being quite sustainable. And that's where we get a number of sustainable scallops, as well as other demersal or like bottom dwelling species. So just to wrap up here, bycatch impacts. So bycatch has negative impacts both on the environment and harvesters. If you're developing a management plan or a harvest strategy for a species, and that species is caught as bycatch in another fishery, that's now an additional consideration because you are increasing the mortality of that species external to the direct harvest of it, which can cause lots of wonky issues in the way that we model and plan to address the management of fisheries. As well, incidental catch of mammals, sharks, rays, seabirds, and other endangered, threatened, or protected species, including different fish and invertebrates, have large-scale conservation impacts, reducing the potential for those species to recover, and ultimately, with the potential of resulting in local or regional or even global extinctions. When bycatch includes juvenile organisms, it impacts the long-term viability of harvest. So even if you're catching the species that you want, if you're catching individuals of that species that are too small, you're catching those fish before they have a chance to breed and to contribute to the next generation, and your fishery will end up potentially being unsustainable. Bycatch is really bad for harvesters as well, and I think people often forget that. Hauling bycatch is really dangerous, it takes a significant amount of time, and it also causes damage to really expensive fishing gear. Gear modifications, the use of closed areas, and the use of more selective fishing methods can help reduce this waste. And in fact, a lot of time and energy is put into discovering and implementing ways to reduce bycatch. These modifications can be incredibly simple. It can be something like changing the shape of a long-line fishing hook from a J shape, which you can see on the bottom panel here, to something that's more of a circle, as you can see on the top. This simple change makes it difficult for some non-target species like turtles and birds to actually be hooked by the gear because there's a mismatch between the gear and their anatomy. So just by making a change in the shape of the hook you make, you can drastically improve the selectivity and reduce bycatch. The resiliency of lobsters and crabs to being exposed to air allows their harvest to be incredibly selective. In the US and Canada, all individuals that are caught within trap fishing for these crustaceans are measured, as you can see here on the left. And if they're below a minimum size, or if they're female, they actually get tossed back into the water and then have the opportunity to grow bigger or to breed. These gears also have mandatory use of what are called escape panels or escape rings, which you can see here is the black circles on the right-hand panel. And those give undersized or non-target species a way to actually get out of a net. The last low-tech solution that I think is a really cool one is in longline fishing, the use of streamers on the line. So the red lines you see here have yellow streamers all over them. And what they do is serve to deter birds from coming close to the gear, which reduces the chance of those birds getting hooked on baited hooks that are right below the surface of the water. And it essentially works like a scarecrow or like the CD you have hanging in your garden to keep a crow from coming near. Solutions can also be really highly technical. So trawl fisheries have been fairly notorious for catching a number of species that they shouldn't, including turtles, and the mandatory inclusion through regulatory management of things called turtle exclusion devices, or TEDs, gives turtles a way to get out of a net if they're caught. And finally, another super, super cool longline modification is long lines that are sinking long lines that go down to some depth tend to incur a lot of bycatch when they're up at the surface because there are hunting predators like like sharks, as well as dolphins, as well as birds that are surface hunters. And what you see on the right, which looks like a mini Coke bottle over a hook, is a really cool solution. What it does is block the hook so that no organism can bite it. And then it actually has a pressure sensor in it so that when the hook hits a certain depth and the water temperature gets to a certain amount, it causes that device to pop off, making the hook accessible to the target species, which is a really, really neat tool. So I hope this kind of outlines for you guys the complexity, even in one part of what we assess at OceanWise for seafood. And it kind of helps exemplify how complex fisheries and aquaculture are, and how difficult it can be to navigate the sustainability of those sources. So with that, I will pass it on to Shiori to give a talk about how we go from those sustainability assessments and generating an understanding of the sustainability of a fishery or aquaculture to getting it on someone's plate.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. So now that we've heard from Rachel about the science behind our recommendations, I want to take a little step back to now discuss how the accounts team utilizes our science to both educate consumers and to tell the sustainability story about seafood. So from the ocean to your plate, the OceanWise Seafood Program works directly with members of the seafood industry with the goal of making a sustainable seafood choice as easy and accessible as possible. So how do we do restaurants? The menu doesn't actually tell the seafood sustainability story. It'll often say something generic like shrimp, salmon, or tuna, with little to no information on where that actual species is coming from or how it was caught or farmed. And as Rachel has demonstrated, there's a lot more context in regards to seafood than we realize. And when provided with good information, we are able to make an informed decision to purchase seafood that has less of an impact on the environment. So, one of the main ways that we work with partners is working with chefs at restaurants. And we do this to educate them on the seafood that they currently use on their menus. Restaurants are an amazing opportunity to educate consumers about the food that they're eating. And chefs also have a really big voice in influencing the types of foods that we eat. But it goes further than that. In addition to chefs and restaurants, we also want to engage other actors within the seafood supply chain, such as suppliers and producers. So, producers are the people who are harvesting or farming seafood. So, it's really important for us to partner with them to encourage and support sustainable harvesting and farming practices. And then suppliers who make these options available to regions in the world. So we can help them highlight and promote their sustainable options to their customers and encourage sustainable purchasing decisions. Then we have retailers who make seafood more accessible to consumers, and we can help them identify which of their options are sustainable in their seafood counters or in their store shelves, and also help them find more sustainable options moving forward. And then finally, we also partner with culinary schools and other institutions to educate students on issues facing the world's oceans and highlighting the complexity of seafood sustainability before they get into the culinary world. So these are the main ways that we work directly with our partners to promote sustainable seafood choices. But we also partner with a bunch of other types of businesses and organizations, including tourism companies, food services, event venues, and more. So as you can see, one of the main pillars of work of our partnership program is sustainable seafood education. So here, there's just a video playing in the background here that shows the sustainable seafood search tool that we have on our website. So this tool is up to date with all of the science of our recommendations, and it's found on our website. It contains over 1,300 recommendations. And as you can see, you can actually click into them, read about the fishery or aquaculture, see how they scored, and actually the original reports that our recommendations are based off of. In addition to this search tool, we also have videos on various sustainable seafoods. We have links to our ever-growing aquablog content, recipes. using sustainable seafood that you can try at home. So when working closely with our partners, the first thing that we want to do is to get a good understanding of the types of seafood that they currently offer. So we gather data such as harvesting or farming method, and also the region that it comes from to determine if it meets our line as an OceanWise recommended option. And once we're able to determine if it's an OceanWise option or not, we share that information openly with the partner, and then we provide them with a list of sustainable alternatives so that they have the choice to increase OceanWise options. So here there's an a seafood audit actually looks like. So it's a form like this that we work with the partner to gather the information and fill out the form. So you'll see there's columns like wild or farmed, how it was caught or harvested, and where it was caught or harvested. And then go to the next slide. And then we use that information, and our staff will then assess each item and identify which ones are OceanWise recommended and which ones are not. And as you can see, we always provide reasoning behind things that are not OceanWise recommended, as well as providing sustainable alternatives so that the partner can consider swapping things out to get more OceanWise offerings. When working with partners, we also want to ensure that the entire team is aware of the OceanWise Seafood program and the sustainable seafood options that are offered by the business. So we offer many different training opportunities for partners, including webinars, in-person or virtual training sessions. We have both printed and digital consumer guides, as well as an online training tool, which covers all aspects of the OceanWise Seafood program, and also available in English and French. And in addition, our team works with a lot of our restaurant partners to curate sustainable seafood fact sheets or talking points that are based specifically on the species that they serve. And this is to make it easier for their staff to be able to answer any questions about OceanWise items on their menu when asked by their customers. So as we've mentioned, we have over 1,300 different recommendations for seafood, and the recommendations are constantly changing throughout the year based upon new information, new assessments, updated assessments, etc. So we provide these updates in the form of a monthly update email to our partners. And the great thing about this is that our partners are constantly learning about different sustainable seafood options as they become available. We always say sustainability is a journey and it takes time. So having access to this type of information helps many of our partners continue to grow the number of OceanWise options on their menu over time. So sometimes a partner will start off by having just a few OceanWise items, but eventually over time, they'll become 100% OceanWise, for example. Events and fundraisers are another way that we are able to take the science of seafood sustainability and make it into a fun and exciting, engaging action. So the Chowder Chowdown is our annual fundraiser event. In this event, OceanWise Seafood partners submit a sustainable seafood chowder recipe, and if accepted, they get to compete for the title of Chowder Chowdown Champion. So events like these allow us to really highlight sustainable seafood and also highlight our partners who are committed to sustainability efforts. So right now, we're currently not able to organize an in-person event for Chowder for 2021. However, we are looking to adapt this event next year to a more COVID-safe national event. So stay tuned for more information coming on that next month. And then social media is also a very powerful tool that we utilize to continue to tell the sustainability story about seafood. We work with a lot of influential chefs who are able to amplify our messaging and reach new audiences that we would not have been able to access otherwise. We have a lot of successful collaborations, such as creating videos for our partners on different types of aquaculture, cooking videos, doing some social media takeovers to talk about seafood sustainability, as well as even doing Instagram lives to teach people how to shuck oysters. So there's been a lot of really fun, creative projects through social media, especially in the last few months during the pandemic. It's been a really interesting year for engaging a lot more virtually and connecting with people over social media to tell the positive food story and also to support our partners as well. So there are many ways that consumers can get involved in advancing sustainable seafood movement. Firstly, look for the Oceanwise logo at restaurants as well as grocery stores to ensure that the seafood you buy is a sustainable choice. If you don't see the Oceanwise logo, you can still ask the staff where you're buying seafood where the seafood is coming from and how it was caught or farmed. Even if they don't have the answer, it will still send a signal to that business that their consumers, their customers care about where their products are coming from, and that can go a long way. Next, you can support businesses that are doing their part to ensure seafood sustainability. There's a partner search map on our website where you can search Oceanwise partners by location or by name, which makes it easier to find them as well. Next, you can stay in touch and keep learning by signing up for our newsletter. And you can also learn more using the various tools and resources on our website, including our seafood search function that we talked about, as well as our sustainable seafood guides. So that brings us to the end of our presentation part.